60 years ago, there was only one person who could ride out of the Kremlin's Spasskaya Tower gate in an armored ZIS-115 Soviet limousine. He had power that any emperor would envy. This car belonged to Josef Stalin. Driving home from work was no simple affair for the leader. Stalin used to sit on a special converted seat, protected by guards on each side. He trusted no one. The Soviet leader strictly instructed the driver which way to go, meaning the car would often turn abruptly from the wide avenues onto Moscow's side streets, weaving a long and confusing route.
He was ready to kill people, and he did kill them. And if he could do it, he thought they could also act this way. And that idea scared him to death.
Stalin's limousine eventually reached a narrow and strictly guarded highway. Many years ago, nobody was allowed here. Local residents had no clue that it hid a facility known only to top officials. This is the Kuntsevo country house, Stalin's personal residence. Even though 60 years have passed since the death of the Soviet leader, Kuntsevo has remained top secret. Filming has only been allowed here on rare occasions. Stalin spent his last 20 years in Kuntsevo, right up to his death. Historians still puzzle over his mysterious demise. Did he die a natural death, or was someone else involved?
He's upstairs with our family whore.
It's not appropriate to talk about one's bride like that. Whoever's bride she is, I raised her, and so on and so forth. Let's at least do the first piece.
Theatre director Alexander Podonsky has frequently been offered the role of Stalin, and he's flatly refused every time. He prefers to work with the classics, looking for parallels with the time of Stalinism.
You're so full of it. I can't understand how he can love any of you.
All his life, he has avoided mentioning Stalin in relation to himself. Few people know that Alexander Berdonsky is not just a theatre director. He's also Joseph Stalin's grandson.
Well, yes, there was Stalin. But for me, just for like any ordinary man, he was up there. I had nothing to do with him. I saw him during the May and November parade. I looked at him from the stands. I only saw him close at the pillar hall of the House of the Unions, where he was lying in state.
In March 1953, the Soviet people bid farewell to Stalin. For 3 days, an endless stream of mourners came to see him lying in state. The first to shout claims that Stalin had been murdered was his son, Vasily. Stalin's circle would not forget the outburst and would soon try to get rid of him. But before doing so, a magnificent funeral was organized for the former leader. Many died in the crush as crowds lined up to see his coffin.
It is impossible to express the grief our party and the people of our country are suffering.
For many years, the Soviet people were led to believe that Stalin had died in his Kremlin apartment, while his country house remained a secret. Only Stalin's inner circle was aware of the circumstances around his death. The leader's descendants have only been able to come here after 60 years. Alexander Berdonsky and Stepan Mikoyan have not seen each other for many years. Stepan is the son of Stalin's closest colleague, Anastas Mikoyan. For the first time, they were invited to Stalin's country house to see with their own eyes where he lived and died.
Good day to you.
Hello.
Glad to see you here. Have you been here before?
Many years ago.
I've never been here. My father used to be here quite often.
Showing them around Stalin's residence is historian Sergei Devyatov. He co-wrote a book about Kuntsevo and knows the place like the back of his hand.
I now understand why Stalin had given the order not to clean away the snow under the windows. He wanted to be able to see footprints, as the windowsills were very low.
There were no such instructions.
Well, he could have merely said it.
Well, actually, all his words were written down as a rule. Let's start our tour. Let's begin with the small dining room.
Stalin was particularly fond of this room, which doubled as his study. There's a fireplace here. Stalin enjoyed spending time in front of it on long winter evenings. A hunting rifle sat close by, as Stalin loved to shoot and scare away the crows. On the first spring night of 1953, he decided to sleep in this very room. The leader was so terrified of assassination attempts that he had several beds prepared for him around the house. Not even his bodyguards knew where he would sleep each night. A decision that was to prove fatal.
He always slept on different couches. He put a chair and a lamp next to the couch where he was going to sleep, as he usually read a book before falling asleep.
On that night, Stalin went to bed at about 4 in the morning. He had stayed up late with guests from his closest circle. Nightly feasts were a regular affair. The bodyguards knew that their master would not be up before noon. But at midday, the bell in Stalin's room remained suspiciously silent. By 3 p.m., he still had not emerged. Bodyguards weren't allowed to call on him uninvited. That was strictly prohibited. Later in the afternoon, duty officers became seriously concerned. Only by 7 o'clock in the evening, having received a letter from the Kremlin, did the officer on duty decide to take it to Stalin. He found the Soviet leader in the doorway of the next room, lying unconscious on the floor.
This is where he was found, on this carpet, between the table and the couch. It is still unclear what happened. There was a glass of mineral water here. Stalin was lying there. Most likely he stood up and failed to get to the couch.
Stalin had suffered a massive stroke, and there was no one close by to give him aid. There were soon rumors that Stalin had not just died, but was murdered.
When a tyrant of such caliber dies, these kinds of assumptions are always made. When a tyrant lives behind high walls, there is always the feeling that his own circle might plot against him.
Stalin's worst fears of conspiracies and assassination may have come to pass with his sudden death. He distrusted the people close to him so much that he fired his bodyguard, Nikolai Vlasic, who had headed his security service for 20 years and was one of his most loyal and reliable people. Shortly after his dismissal, Vlasic ended up in jail.
The official reason for Vlasic's imprisonment was that he misbehaved and fooled around at the expense of the state, but Stalin never blamed anyone for that. He decided to get rid of him because Vlasic had held office for too long and had become unreliable.
Vlasic would stand beside the leader during all public occasions. He was a general who had finished only 3 classes of secondary school and had been decorated without having performed a single feat. Stalin never knew that his personal bodyguard kept a secret diary of his time with the leader. No one else dared do so, as Stalin himself would decide how and by whom he would be remembered in history. For many years, Vlasic's unique record of the Stalin era was classified. Just recently has it been made available to the general public. It's the only unofficial testimony of a man who had been with Stalin all the time.
He used to wear an old, shabby coat. I offered his wife, Nadezhda, to make him a new one, but she needed to take his measurements to do so.